Well, hello there. This is D, and welcome to Uneven. How you doing today? I was going to open this podcast episode by saying I'm sitting on the porch watching people walking their dogs and kids coming home from school and playing soccer and neighbors mowing their lawn and birds chirping in the trees. In fact, I actually recorded this saying that. And then, of course, this big wind kicks up, and nothing kills a podcast recording quicker than wind. And I knew I just couldn't continue to record that, so now I'm in my basement at my desk with my big microphone in front of me, and I'm going to record this one here where I know I'll have some quiet for a while I talk to you. I was listening to a podcast yesterday where the guest was a former Navy SEAL, and he had talked about his what all he went through, SEAL training and also acting as a SEAL and all that sort of stuff. And it was really interesting because the whole time I'm listening to all this stuff he went through, Hell Week, near drowning, lack of sleep, all this stuff that he dealt with, and including in battle and, being blown up by a hand grenade and all this stuff he went through. I kept thinking to myself, how fucking weak am I? I could never do that. I could never imagine doing that. This is so far beyond who I am, and I feel weak. I feel less than. I feel afraid. I feel like a coward sometimes. I'm human. I have those feelings. Now, of course, today we're going to talk about that and try to figure out the myths and the reality of all that. But I think I'm not the only one who has those feelings. And they don't feel good. And some of that is just our own insecurities coming out. But some of it also is generated by the world around us. So I decided to talk about this today, and I thought it was a good topic. And as I was starting to prep, I remembered that I'd written something on this in my book, Benzo-Free, The World of Anti-Anxiety Drugs and the Reality of Withdrawal. And I wrote a chapter on anxiety and what is anxiety and where it comes from and how history has treated those individuals with anxiety. So I went back there and pulled some of the references and pulled some notes to include today. So if you hear me shuffling a little bit of paper, that's what that's from. But most of this is ad-libbed. I'm just kind of reading some sections here or there because I wanted to pull it in. But let's look back at a little bit. Let me just set the stage here about how anxiety has been treated by the world. General Patton, the U.S. General Patton, World War II, wanted combat exhaustion, also called war neurosis, that's the nervousness, to be punishable by death, claiming it was a mere problem of the will. British Army deserters in World War II were put to death. In fact, British generals stated in reputable medical journals that men who panicked during combat should be sterilized. Quote, because only such a measure would prevent men from showing fear and passing on to another generation their mental weakness. I'm not putting down the military, and I get where this comes from because this is an extreme situations, and you need to know that the men around you, men and women now around you, you can rely on. And I get where that's coming from, but this is excessive. Throughout history, people with anxiety have been humiliated, demeaned, shunned, incarcerated, even killed. And for what? Because we're weak? Is that why? Because actually, anxiety has nothing to do with weakness. There's a former Olympian who dealt with a lot of anxiety. His name was Michael Phelps. He was the most decorated Olympian of all time. Following the 2012 Olympics in London, he said, I didn't want to be in this sport anymore. I didn't want to be alive anymore. In fact, he stayed in his room for almost 5 days, barely sleeping or eating. Michael Phelps suffered from severe anxiety. One of the most decorated Olympian of all time suffered from severe anxiety. I would not call Michael Phelps weak. I don't think most people would. Let's look back at anxiety for a second and then try to demystify some of this and understand it better, because I deal with this and I struggle with this and I don't feel proud of myself sometimes. And I wanted to understand the scenario better when I was coming off of benzos and dealing with that severe anxiety I had for so long, and the anxiety I still carry with me today and still deal with. In fact, there's a quote that I put in my book, and it was from David H. Barlow in the book Anxiety and Its Disorders from 2002, and he said, "Anxiety kills relatively few people, but many more would welcome death as an alternative to the paralysis and suffering resulting from anxiety in its severest forms." Does that sound familiar to any of you? That type of experience? Because I know it sure as hell does to me. And I know it does to many of you that I have worked with. Severe anxiety can destroy your life one day at a time. But there's also good, and there's also a reason for this. And I want to deconstruct this a little bit so we understand it better. In general, as with most things that we experience as human beings, and most personality traits, in most behaviors, whatever it is a human being does, there's often, two causes. There's the old nature versus nurture debate, which I think is always hilarious, because I haven't heard one time when it's just one. It seems like it's always both. And with anxiety, it's no different. So let's look at nature first, or the biological factor. And we're going to look at genetics here for a second. There was a unique study by Andy Morgan at the Yale School of Medicine, and he discovered a key brain chemical called neuropeptide Y, NPY. And this is interesting because we're going to go back to the military again here, where we studied special forces recruits like Navy SEALs. And he found that special forces recruits who performed the most effectively during SERE, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training, he found that the ones who did the best had higher levels of this NPY chemical than the poorer forming recruits, as much as 1/3 higher. In fact, some individuals with high NPY levels seem utterly immune to developing PTSD. No amount of stress can break them. Another study conducted by the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel found that people with anxiety disorders see the world differently than others because emotional experiences induce plasticity in their brain circuits that last after the experience is over. And Scott Stossel wrote in his book, My Age of Anxiety, great book. If you haven't checked it out, it'll be one of our book reports coming down the line. But he said, the number of studies on heredability of anxiety is climbing into the tens of thousands. And the overwhelming conclusion of almost all of them is that your susceptibility to anxiety, both as a temperamental tendency and as a clinical disorder, is strongly determined by your genes. So think about that. And go back to that quote of, it's just a matter of will. It's not for us. We are wired differently. We are different. We don't process stress as others do. It is harder for us. And I think that's something to keep in mind when you think to yourself, you're weak, or somebody else, you hear somebody use the term weak. We're not weak. We just have a different system. And genetics is not the only factor. There are so many factors, but another one is environmental. I mean, how many times have you heard the cliche of somebody sitting in a psychotherapist's office and the therapist says, tell me about your mother. Tell me about your childhood. Tell me about your experiences when you were a child. The reason why they ask those questions is because things that happen to us as a child can significantly influence how we behave and how we respond to things as we get older. And even the people who have that high NPY level and seem to be immune to stress can still be affected by traumatic events in their life, whether it's war or a disaster. Nobody is totally immune to stress. And that still is just part of the picture. There's also a lot of information about the gut and anxiety and the gut bacteria. There's so many other factors that play into this. It is never, almost never, one thing. But what I'm trying to say is there are a lot of factors that build to feed into that foundation of how you handle anxiety. And that your will to overcome that is just one piece. And it's actually harder for some people, significantly harder for some people. And that helped me be a little less self-loathing, a little less self-critical about how I respond to stressful situations. And finally, on this note, you're not alone. You're in good company. 263 million people were living with anxiety disorders in 2015. That's about 3.6% of the world's population, and it has definitely increased since then, as the numbers have shown. A lot of us are struggling with anxiety today. In fact, many researchers are calling our modern era the age of anxiety. Renee Garfinkel from the Washington Times wrote the following: "Our way of life promotes anxiety and its consequences. Anxiety makes us fearful. It makes us irritable and therefore easily and excessively prone to anger. Fear and anger are powerful antagonists to reason and reflection. They grab us by our primitive brain and urge us to fight, flee, or freeze. New media, social media, and political leaders command our attention with outrage and alarm. The media's daily reminders to be very afraid and politicians' apocalyptic rhetoric reverberate throughout the internet, keeping our anxiety at a constant high level." We live in a very anxious time. I'm not saying this is the hardest time. There have definitely been harder times, but this is a very anxious time. And a lot of that has to do with the internet. But now let's look at the brighter side of things. Now on the bright side of life. Let's look at the brighter side of things here. What are the upsides to anxiety? Why would I want to have anxiety or not have anxiety? Again, I got to stop saying that, because I'm guilty of saying to have anxiety when anxiety is something everybody has. I'm saying for those of us who have excessive anxiety or a difficulty handling or managing our anxiety. But there's an upside. Number one, we can avoid danger. Our anxiety sometimes actually pays off. It has for me at times, and it may have happened for you. Sometimes that anxiety keeps us out of dangerous situations. And the other thing, too, is that people who suffer from excessive anxiety are often overthinkers. Our minds are always working, constantly creating. Creativity and anxiety goes hand in hand with most people. And if you don't think you're in good company, how about Emily Dickinson? She suffered from debilitating anxiety and was often housebound. Her suffering fed her creativity. She rarely left her bedroom after she turned the age of 40. And how about Charles Darwin? He was housebound by anxiety for decades and would probably never have been able to finish his work on evolution if it wasn't for this disability. Or Sir Isaac Newton, who invented calculus, which no one knew about for 10 years because he was too agoraphobic to leave his home. And there might be a couple others like Michelangelo, Van Gogh, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Nikola Tesla, Abraham Lincoln. Or if you want people more recent, how about pop culture? Adele, Drew Barrymore, David Beckham, Kristen Bell, David Bowie, Ray Charles, Eric Clapton, Dick Clark, John Cleese, Sheryl Crow, Miley Cyrus, Paula Deen, Johnny Depp, Judy Garland, Whoopi Goldberg, Anthony Hopkins, Scarlett Johansson, Ashley Judd, Demi Lovato, John Mayer, Marilyn Monroe, Sir Laurence Olivier, Bonnie Raitt, Mickey Rourke, Sarah Silverman, Howard Stern, Emma Stone, Amanda Seyfried, Joey Votto, and Oprah Winfrey. have all had difficulties with anxiety and anxiety-related disorders. Are you feeling a little less alone? You're in good company. We're in good company. People who struggle with excessive anxiety are good people. We're not weak. We have different wiring. And I don't say wiring like it's actual the way the nerves run through the body. I mean wiring as in our physiology and our psychology, which responds to anxiety and stressful situations different than many other people. And I get annoyed by other people sometimes. When somebody says, just stop worrying, or suck it up, or, be positive all the time. It's a great idea. I really think so. But it's not that easy. And I think many people think it's easy and they wonder why we just don't do it. And we don't do it because it's not that easy. We've tried. But it leaves us wondering, how do we respond to this? And this is where it comes back to ourselves. And I think there's two pieces here. And one is, we just want a little understanding. I'm not asking the world to change for me. I'm not. Maybe you are, and I get that. I mean, I don't want deserters executed in military anymore. I don't even want them kicked out. There's other jobs they could do. I do understand the need to be able to trust somebody on the battlefield or on the playing field or wherever you're at. You need to be able to trust the teammates that are with you. I get that. That can be a life or death situation. And maybe for people with anxiety disorders, that's not the place we should be. I understand that. But I don't think we should be executed or sterilized because of it. I don't even think we should be shunned. I think a little understanding would be great. And maybe find other jobs that might fit our constitutions a little better. I'm not eliminating us from the military ship, but there are some military jobs where anxiety may not be as significant of a factor. But I also don't need everybody around me to change because I'm anxious, because I don't handle anxiety. I don't want that. The world is an exciting, interesting, fascinating, dangerous, bizarre, wonderful place. And I want to explore that as much as I can. But dealing with my anxiety is my problem, and I've mentioned that in previous ones. One of the places, or one of the resources or sources that I found some wisdom in, of course, was some Buddhist thinking. I've researched all kinds of stuff, Buddhism, Christianity. On the religious side, I researched a lot of pop psychology, people all over the place. But there was this one Buddhist monk that had a quote that really stuck with me. This is the quote that stuck with me more than anything else I read when I was dealing with my benzodiazepine withdrawal, and I had such extreme anxiety and emotions and reactive nature. And this is from Shantideva, a Buddhist monk from the 700s CE, so been a little while ago. And he wrote, "Where is there enough leather to cover the surface of the earth? But just having leather on the soles of one's feet is the same as covering the whole earth." Meaning, if you are walking on sharp rocks and it's cutting up your feet, you can cover the entire earth, or try to cover the entire earth with leather, or you can just cut out shoes or sandals and put them on your feet. One sounds a little more realistic. And this really stuck with me. And here's what I wrote in my book after I used this quote. I just want to share that with you. "Thanks to benzo withdrawal, I am more sensitive now than I have ever been in my entire life. And I wish to hell I wasn't. I don't enjoy being overly sensitive. Then again, I don't know anyone who does. I work hard being less reactive, and I am not asking for any special treatment or accommodations because of this condition. It's my burden, and I am the one who must learn to live with it. But it's real, despite what some may say, and I am doing the best I can to manage it. As for me, I am cutting the leather and making shoes. Now, I know that's simplistic and not that easy, but it comes back to one of the core principles that I've already talked about several times here, but that is taking responsibility for our own selves and our own improvement and finding a way to make life better for us. Less blame, less victimhood, more self-responsibility. It's a core value that I believe in. You may not, and that's okay, but I do. I think that's the only way we really get better as a person and get better as a society. Are there times when we should stand up and help make changes in society because something's wrong? Of course there are. But for a lot of things, I need to start at home. I need to start with myself. And I try to do that as much as I can. So if anybody's ever told you that you are weak because you suffer from anxiety or suffer from excessive anxiety, unmanageable anxiety, overwhelming anxiety, just remember, you're not. You're not weak. You're wired a little bit differently. Maybe because of an event that happened in your life, maybe because of your childhood, maybe because you don't have the right chemical running through your bloodstream. Or maybe all the above. We're not weak, we're just different. We respond differently than other people, and all we're asking is that people take that into consideration. That's my 2 cents. That's my pedestal, and I'm going to step off right now. I'm going to close this one out, but this is one I really wanted to do, and it just hit me the other day when I heard that podcast, and I just thought this is a good one to talk about. So there you go. I love y'all. I feel for you. I know you're going through some shit. I know you're going through a lot of crap. This is a nightmare for so many of us, but we're going to get through it. We really are. I wouldn't keep doing these podcasts, both this one and the benzo-free one, if I didn't have hope. Don't forget to write in the comments on YouTube or on our website. We have posts there. You can comment there too. Or any place else you see our podcasts. I do want to hear from you, and it really influences what we do. In fact, I'll do another Q&A or another, comments episode as soon as I've accumulated some of those and are ready to go again. And also one more thing, for those who have been wondering what happened to the Benzo Free podcast, just so you know, tomorrow is May 1st. And I got another episode ready to come. In fact, I just finished the prep for the new format of the Benzo Free podcast. And all I can say is it's going to be coming out a little more frequently than it used to. So keep your eyes open for that. Y'all take care. Thanks so much for joining me for this conversation. And I wish you well. Talk to you soon. Bye. Hey, this is Dee. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out our podcast. I do need to remind everyone that this podcast is for informational purposes only and should never be considered medical, psychological, or professional health advice of any kind. If you or someone you know is dealing with significant mental health issues, please seek professional help. Resources can be found in our show notes and on our website at unevenpodcast.com. Take care of yourself, and I'll catch you on the flip side.